At the prestigious Fairmont Grand Hotel, the ballroom gleamed under the twinkling light of crystal chandeliers, casting a dazzling glow over the impeccably dressed crowd. The space buzzed with quiet conversation, the soft clink of glasses, and the gentle murmur of laughter, all set against a backdrop of elegance and refinement. Guests, dressed in their finest attire, sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries. But there was an unmistakable sense that something much bigger was unfolding. This wasn't just a glamorous gathering. It was a charity event, a night dedicated to raising funds and awareness for underprivileged youth. Still, despite the noble cause, the atmosphere carried an underlying anticipation. The crowd was waiting for something more than just the evening's festivities. Amidst the crowd stood Barron Trump, his presence nearly silent yet undeniable. At just 18 years old, he didn't try to steal the spotlight. He wasn't a young man demanding attention. Rather, he was an observer, sitting at a table toward the back, watching the world around him with quiet composure. His tall frame and poised demeanor set him apart, but not in a way that screamed for admiration. Barron was content to remain in the shadows, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room with a calm that seemed far beyond his years. He had been invited to the gala by a family friend, a gesture to introduce him to a world that many would only dream of. Yet, while the rest of the guests thrived in the glow of attention, Barron found comfort in simply being present, in observing the event and the people around him. As the evening wore on, the air in the ballroom seemed to thicken with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. The string quartet played softly in the background, adding to the elegance of the event. Waiters glided seamlessly through the crowd, offering delicate hors d'oeuvres and refreshing drinks. Laughter rippled through the room, but the true focal point of the evening, the keynote speech, was still to come. Among the guests, there was an air of quiet expectancy, as if everyone could feel the weight of the moment building. People settled into their seats. Conversations simmered down, and all eyes soon turned to the stage, awaiting the speech that would dominate the night. The keynote speaker, a celebrated journalist known for their sharp wit and unapologetic opinions, was a figure who stirred strong emotions in both supporters and detractors. Their bold rhetoric had earned them a reputation, one that attracted both admiration and controversy in equal measure. That night, they were set to deliver an address that would challenge perspectives and spark debate. For some, it was a chance to hear their unique voice, to engage with their ideas on politics and culture. For others, it was an opportunity to be entertained by their signature sharpness, their ability to mix humor and pointed commentary. What no one in the room could have expected, however, was how the night's events would unfold, or how a quiet young man, barely an adult, would turn the evening into something that would leave a lasting impression on everyone. The moment the journalist stepped onto the stage, dressed in a sleek black suit, there was a palpable shift in the room. The audience's attention snapped to the podium, their eyes drawn to the confident figure who now stood at the center of the spotlight. A polite round of applause echoed throughout the ballroom, and the journalists smiled, their confidence evident. But as they began their speech, it became clear that their usual mix of humor and sharp critique was about to take the crowd on a roller coaster ride of emotions. The jokes began lightheartedly. An amusing anecdote about a previous gala mishap involving a toppled champagne tower made everyone laugh, breaking the tension and setting the tone for what promised to be a memorable speech. As the speech continued, the tone subtly shifted. What had started as playful banter soon turned into something much more pointed, a critique of the current state of politics, culture, and the people who shaped it. The journalist didn't hold back, making clever jabs at politicians and celebrities, poking fun at their foibles and mistakes. Laughter rippled through the room, with some people visibly enjoying the humor. But others, those more sensitive to the subject matter, exchanged uneasy glances. The room's atmosphere began to change, becoming less relaxed and more charged with anticipation. And then, the focus landed on none other than Donald Trump. Well, we can't talk about the state of the world without mentioning the man who made orange the new black, the journalist quipped, sending the room into fits of laughter. Love him or hate him, you have to admit he's the gift that keeps on giving for people like me. The audience's response was mixed. with some laughing openly while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was clear the tone had shifted, but the real turning point came when the journalist casually brought up Barron Trump. Of course, the journalist continued, we can't forget his most overlooked legacy, the next generation. Let's talk about Barron. Imagine growing up in a golden tower, surrounded by marble everything, while your dad tweets about coffee, and the rest of us are just trying to survive Monday mornings. That must have been character building. A wave of discomfort swept through the room, the joke landing with a heavy thud. The crowd was caught off guard, and the reaction was swift. Some chuckled nervously, while others fell silent, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the speech had taken. All eyes turned to Barron, who had now become the unintended focus of the evening. He sat still, his face expressionless, an island of calm in the middle of a growing storm. Instead of showing anger or even a hint of discomfort, Barron remained composed, his eyes unfazed as the room shifted its attention to him. The silence stretched on, the tension thickening with every second. The journalist, sensing the change in the room, tried to regain control of the moment. Tough crowd, they muttered into the microphone, forcing a laugh that no one echoed. But the damage had been done. The audience, once buzzing with conversation, was now hushed, each person reflecting on the weight of what had just been said. In that moment, Barron stood up slowly, his height commanding attention. He moved toward the stage with purpose, each step deliberate, his posture straight and unwavering. The crowd fell into an almost unnerving silence as Barron made his way to the front. His presence alone was enough to make the journalist falter, their confident smile slipping slightly. When Barron reached the edge of the stage, he stood tall, facing the room and the journalist with a quiet authority that seemed to fill the space. Then, with a voice steady and calm, Barron spoke. "Thank you for your insight," he said, his words surprising everyone in the room. There was no anger, no defensiveness, only a quiet strength that cut through the tension. "I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me, my family, and my life. It's become a game for some, filling in the gaps when they don't know the full story." The room fell silent, captivated by the maturity in Barron's words. He continued, his tone shifting. "But behind every headline, behind every punchline, there's a human being, someone with their own struggles, their own dreams. You may think you know me because of who my father is, but you don't. Not really." Barron paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "What I've learned is that respect doesn't have to be earned. It should be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's story." The crowd, still stunned, watched as Barron addressed the larger issue at hand. "Words have power," he said. "They can hurt, or they can heal. They can divide, or they can unite. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter." Barron's words, delivered with such calm conviction, sent a wave of realization through the crowd. They weren't just about defending himself, they were a call for kindness, empathy, and respect. As he turned and walked back to his seat, the silence lingered for a moment before the room erupted into a standing ovation. The applause, hesitant at first, grew into a thunderous roar, the respect for Barron's composure and integrity clear. In the end, Barron Trump's calm response to an unexpected and uncomfortable moment became a lesson for everyone in that room and beyond about the power of words, the importance of respect, and the strength of quiet dignity. When the journalist stepped onto the stage, dressed in a sleek black suit, they commanded attention. Their confident smile and poised demeanor set the tone for the evening. The audience, eager for the speech, settled in, and the journalist began with lighthearted remarks. They cracked jokes about the city's notoriously terrible traffic and shared a humorous anecdote about a previous gala mishap, where a champagne tower had collapsed in a dramatic fashion. Laughter rippled through the room, and the crowd relaxed, sinking into the familiar cadence of a well-executed public speech. But soon, the atmosphere began to change. The journalist's tone shifted from playful to pointed, their words biting as they turned their focus to political figures and their often controversial actions. They wove jabs about public personalities into their commentary, hitting familiar targets in the political sphere. Some in the crowd laughed, nodding in agreement, while others grew noticeably uncomfortable. The room, once light and cheerful, began to hum with unease. The humor had lost its warmth, and the jokes seemed to push the boundaries of what had been deemed acceptable. Then, with the crowd's energy at a boiling point, the journalist targeted none other than Barron Trump's father, Donald Trump. Well, we can't talk about the state of the world without mentioning the man who made orange the new black, the journalist quipped, drawing a mixture of scattered laughter and a few raised eyebrows. Love him or hate him, you have to admit he's the gift that keeps on giving for people like me. The crowd seemed torn. While some responded with laughter, others grew visibly tense, unsure of how to react to such a sharp dig. The room now seemed split, with the energy becoming distinctly polarized, the divide growing wider with every word. But it wasn't until the journalist's next remark that the entire atmosphere shifted. There was a moment of uneasy silence before the journalist, seemingly unbothered by the tension, casually introduced their next target. And of course, we can't forget his most overlooked legacy, his next generation, they said, their tone dripping with mockery. The crowd collectively stiffened, sensing that this was no longer a lighthearted critique, but a personal jab. Let's talk about Barron, the journalist continued, as if revealing an inside joke to the audience. Imagine growing up in a golden tower, surrounded by marble everything, while your dad tweets about coffee, and the rest of us are just trying to survive Monday mornings. That must have been character building. The moment the words left the journalist's mouth, a cold silence fell over the room. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their discomfort palpable. The sharp humor had cut deep, and not everyone found it amusing. Some chuckled nervously, while others looked away, unsure of how to react. But the most noticeable reaction came from Barron himself, who was seated toward the back of the room. His calm demeanor, his stillness in the face of public scrutiny, stood in stark contrast to the tension now filling the ballroom. In that instant, the joke, the mockery, had shifted the focus of the evening. Barron, thrust into the limelight, remained poised and composed, his expression unreadable, his presence quietly defiant, while the audience was left in the awkward aftershock of the journalist's words. Barron sat with a quiet strength that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. His posture was unshaken, and his eyes remained steady, focused somewhere beyond the moment, where the room had once been alive with chatter and light-hearted laughter. Now there was only the lingering weight of discomfort. The silence in the room stretched on, growing heavier with every passing second. A few uncomfortable whispers slipped through the crowd as the reality of the situation settled in. The journalist, sensing the tension, faltered briefly. They cleared their throat, trying to regain control of the moment. "Tough crowd," they muttered into the microphone, trying to force a laugh that no one echoed. The energy in the room was thick now, and it was clear that what had been intended as humor had landed differently than expected. But still, Barron remained unmoved. His presence, though understated, seemed to grow in strength. The longer he sat silently, the more powerful his stillness became. It wasn't indifference, no. It was something far more compelling. His quiet composure, his ability to absorb the weight of the moment without reacting in anger or defensiveness, left the room in stunned awe. The audience, having been swept up in the journalist's provocative words, now found themselves reflecting on the power of Barron's response, or lack thereof. The silence in the room was deafening, but it was a silence that spoke volumes. Finally, Barron made his move. He stood up slowly, the soft scrape of his chair legs against the floor piercing the stillness. His height, his calm yet deliberate movements, every step he took commanded attention. His posture was straight, his demeanor unwavering. As he walked toward the stage, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. The journalist, once confident and unshaken, now froze. They had been expecting laughter, or perhaps some form of dismissal, but what they got instead was Barron's quiet resolve, his presence filling the space in a way that rendered everyone else momentarily speechless. When Barron reached the stage, he stood still for a moment, looking out at the crowd. His eyes swept across the room, acknowledging every single person there. And then, without a hint of aggression, he addressed the journalist. "Thank you for your insight," he said, his voice calm but steady, surprising everyone, including the journalist. There was no anger, no harsh rebuttal, just a clear, composed response that carried more weight than any words of defiance ever could. "I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me, my family, and my life," Barron continued, his gaze unwavering. "It's become a game for some, filling in the gaps when they don't know the full story. But behind every headline, behind every punchline, there's a human being, someone with their own struggles, their own dreams. You may think you know me because of who my father is, but you don't. Not really." The room grew even quieter. If that was possible, Barron's words weren't a challenge. They were a mirror, reflecting the weight of the assumptions that had been placed on him and his family. He paused for a moment, allowing the words to resonate, and then continued. "What I've learned is that respect doesn't have to be earned. It should be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's story." The crowd was captivated. Even those who had previously laughed at the journalist's jokes were now frozen in place, struck by the sincerity and maturity in Barron's voice. There was no malice, no venom in his words, only the quiet strength of someone who had weathered far more than most could imagine. "Words have power," Barron said, turning to face the audience now. "They can hurt, or they can heal. They can divide, or they can unite. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter." His words, delivered with poise and clarity, left no room for argument. It wasn't just about him. It was a call for all of them to consider the impact of their words on others before they spoke. As Barron turned to walk back to his seat, the room remained motionless for a moment longer. But as soon as he sat down, the silence shattered. The applause began hesitantly at first, a few claps here and there, but it grew, spreading rapidly through the room like wildfire until everyone was on their feet, clapping and cheering for the young man who had just delivered a lesson in grace and strength. The journalist, standing at the podium, was left to take in the moment, their earlier bravado completely deflated. In the weeks that followed, Barron's words echoed across social media and news outlets. People spoke of his composure, his quiet strength, and his ability to stand up for what was right without resorting to anger or bitterness. It wasn't just the words he said, it was the way he said them, with maturity beyond his years. That resonated with so many. The applause that had followed his speech wasn't just for his courage in that moment. It was a recognition that respect and empathy have the power to unite us all, even in the most difficult of circumstances. A collective gasp swept through the room, a sharp intake of breath that could be felt across the ballroom. Eyes quickly shifted to Barron, who remained seated, still as stone, his face suddenly the focal point of the crowd's attention. The journalist's jabs, meant to be clever, hung in the air like a sour note. Some guests attempted to laugh, their chuckles half-hearted and uneasy, but the majority fell into a stunned silence. Barron, however, remained a picture of calm. His expression was stoic, unreadable, yet his silence carried more weight than any words could. Instead of retreating into the shadows of embarrassment or responding with indignation, Barron's stillness was like a quiet challenge, an unspoken defiance, while the room, once full of light chatter and laughter, now seemed to be holding its breath. Barron did not flinch, did not fidget in his seat, nor did he cast his gaze about the room for reassurance. He was unshaken, unbothered by the remark that had so awkwardly been aimed in his direction. In stark contrast, the journalist, who moments before had been filled with bravado, now stood visibly shaken. Their self-assured grin faltered slightly, their confidence slipping as the uncomfortable silence enveloped the room. The audience, once complicit in the light-hearted mockery, now found themselves in the midst of an uncomfortable realization. Barron's silent composure stood in stark contrast to the journalist's biting words, creating a tension that no one could ignore. His lack of reaction was not a sign of weakness or submission. It was a quiet yet powerful defiance that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. A few nearby guests exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable, but no one dared to speak. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as the audience seemed to collectively await Barron's next move. But Barron didn't move. He sat, his hands resting calmly on the edge of the table, his eyes fixed ahead, remaining the quiet centerpiece of the moment. The stillness of his presence seemed to grow, magnifying with each passing second, and it was clear that the room was beginning to sense the gravity of what had just unfolded. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Barron slowly pushed back from his seat. The sound of his chair scraping against the polished floor echoed throughout the room, slicing through the silence with a simple, deliberate action. Standing to his full height, Barron's imposing figure commanded attention without a single word. The collective gaze of the room followed him as he took each step toward the stage. His posture straight, his movements deliberate. There was a calm authority in the way he walked, a quiet strength that left no room for misunderstanding. The room held its breath, unsure of what would come next, yet clearly aware that something powerful was unfolding. The journalist, who moments ago had reveled in the spotlight, now stood frozen in place, their earlier confidence slowly dissolving under the weight of Barron's composed presence. The crowd, which had once been captivated by the journalist's words, now seemed to sense a shift in power. The once boisterous and playful tone of the evening had evaporated, leaving only an eerie stillness that could be felt in every corner of the ballroom. The journalist, their smirk slipping away, found themselves in the uncomfortable position of being the object of attention they had sought to direct elsewhere. With each step Barron took, the tension in the room mounted. The guests, once distracted by the buzz of the evening, were now captivated by the quiet dignity with which Barron carried himself. He didn't need to speak to command respect. His presence alone was enough to draw the attention of every person in the room. The silence surrounding him was thick, but it wasn't oppressive. It was powerful, deliberate, and filled with the kind of maturity that couldn't be forced or faked. As Barron reached the stage, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. The journalists stood frozen, their posture betraying a hint of discomfort. The uncertainty of how to react to Barron's composed demeanor now evident in their rigid stance. The moment of tension seemed to stretch on forever, as if the entire room was waiting for Barron to deliver his next words. And when Barron finally spoke, the simplicity and grace of his words took everyone by surprise. "Thank you for your insight," he said, his tone calm but firm, his choice of words understated yet powerful. There was no fire in his voice, no anger, only a clear, steady message that resonated with the weight of the moment. His words cut through the air with a precision that needed no amplification. The journalist, taken aback by Barron's poise, stood there, caught off guard by the maturity and composure that filled the room with such quiet strength. "I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me, my family, and my life," Barron continued, his voice carrying the weight of experience beyond his years. "It's become a game for some, trying to fill in the gaps when they don't know the full story. But behind every headline, every joke, there's a human being, someone with their own struggles, their own story. You may think you know me because of who my father is, but you don't. Not really." The room, which had been filled with unease moments earlier, now seemed utterly still, as if even the faintest sound would disrupt the gravity of Barron's words. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, drawn in by the maturity in his voice and the depth of his message. There was no bitterness, no anger in his words, just a quiet assertion of his humanity and the unfair assumptions placed upon him. "What I've learned is that respect doesn't have to be earned. It should be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's story," Barron continued, his words building with quiet intensity. "We live in a world where it's easy to tear each other down, but words have power. They can heal or they can hurt. They can unite or they can divide. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter." As Barron finished speaking, the tension in the room was palpable. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The audience, once caught up in the earlier drama of the journalist's jokes, now found themselves reflecting on the profound truth that had just been laid out before them. Barron's words, delivered with such poise and dignity, had turned the entire room on its head. The journalist, who had sought to shine in the spotlight, now stood at the center of their own discomfort, their bravado completely shattered by Barron's quiet strength. The silence was broken as Barron turned and began to walk back to his seat. The sound of his footsteps was the only thing breaking the stillness. As he sat down, a hesitant applause began. At first, it was a soft smattering of claps, uncertain but growing in strength. Soon, the entire ballroom was on its feet, giving Barron a standing ovation that reverberated through the room, a testament to his courage, his dignity, and the powerful message he had just delivered. The journalist, still standing at the podium, could only watch in stunned silence. The moment had slipped away from them, and they knew it. The applause was no longer for them, but for the young man who had shown the room what it truly meant to have class, to have integrity, and to choose respect, even when it was undeserved. As Barron reached the edge of the stage, he paused and turned toward the crowd, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on the journalist. The tension was almost unbearable, and then, with a calmness that surprised everyone, Barron spoke, his voice, steady and deliberate, cut through the thick silence. "Thank you for your insight," he said, his tone both respectful and firm, the words unexpectedly simple. "I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me and my family," he continued, his gaze never leaving the journalist. "It's almost become a game for some, filling in the gaps when you don't know the full story. And I get it. We're public figures. It comes with the territory." The room remained still, captivated by the clarity in Barron's voice. Even those who had chuckled at the earlier jokes were now silent, their faces showing discomfort. But Barron didn't stop there. Behind every headline, behind every punchline, there's a human being, someone with their own struggles, their own dreams, and their own story. "You may think you know me because of who my father is, but you don't. Not really." The journalist, who had been gripping the podium with increasing unease, was visibly uncomfortable. Barron's words were not an attack, but a mirror reflecting the weight of their comments. The young man continued, his words laced with quiet conviction. "What I've learned," he said, his tone now shifting slightly, "is that respect doesn't have to be earned. It should be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's story." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience, but Barron wasn't done. He turned his attention to the larger room, addressing the crowd as much as the journalist. "We live in a time where it's easy to tear each other down," Barron continued. "Words have power. They can hurt or they can heal. They can divide or they can unite. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter." The room was spellbound, hanging on every word Barron spoke. His calm, resolute tone resonated deeply with the audience, transcending his age and the situation. He took a step back, his eyes locking once again with the journalist, who was visibly taken aback. "I hope this gives you something to think about," Barron said softly. There was no malice in his voice, just an unwavering strength that left the room in awe. Turning away, Barron made his way back to his seat, the soft click of his shoes on the polished floor the only sound in the room. The silence that followed was deafening, and no one moved for what felt like an eternity. Then, as if to break the stillness, the applause began, hesitant at first, but quickly growing into a roaring standing ovation. The room was on its feet, the energy palpable. The journalist, still standing at the podium, tried to muster a smile, but it was clear that the moment no longer belonged to them. As the applause continued, Barron sat back at his table, offering only a quiet nod to those around him. He had delivered a powerful message, not with anger or defiance, but with calm strength and maturity beyond his years. And in doing so, he had not only defended his own dignity, but had inspired others to pause and reflect on how they treated those around them. The impact of Barron's words spread far beyond the gala. Videos of his speech went viral, flooding social media platforms and sparking conversations across the nation. News outlets picked up the story, with many praising Barron for his maturity and composure. Some criticized the journalist's remarks, questioning the ethics of mocking a young person in the public eye. Regardless of the debate, one thing was clear: Barron's message had struck a chord. His response to the mockery he faced was a reminder that respect and empathy should be given freely, even in the face of provocation. For Barron, however, the attention was irrelevant. He returned to his life with quiet dignity, focusing on his studies and personal interests. While the world continued to discuss the powerful lesson he had left behind, the moment may have been brief, but its impact was lasting, teaching everyone in that room and beyond that true strength lies not in how loud we speak, but in how we choose to respond with grace and respect.